My name is Goldie. I'm from the Diang district of Nepal, and I want to share something with you. This is a real story from my childhood. I was 12 years old, living with my 3 sisters and little brother. Though we lived in a city, our paternal home was in a village where my uncle lived with his wife, their 3 kids, and my grandmother. It's there that my story takes place. My grandmother had been sick for a long time. One winter day, we were home when we got a phone call from the village telling us my grandmother had passed away. We left for the village immediately after. We stayed at my uncle's house for several days, and every day I would go to the terrace to enjoy the warm sunlight. One day, almost a week after the death of my grandmother, I was walking around the terrace. I noticed something in the yard of the neighboring house. From what I remembered, that house had been empty for a long time. It was old and in very poor condition, making it almost appear to resemble a dungeon. Yet, despite that desolation, I noticed a rose flower blooming on a small plant in the middle of the yard. I just stood there in a state of astonishment. As I was looking at the rose flower, my cousin walked up and asked me to stop looking at that house. I found it odd and asked him why, but he wouldn't say. He just asked me to come over to the other side of the terrace and play with him. I did what he asked, and I didn't really give it much thought. The next day, many of our relatives had come to visit, and we were all sitting on the terrace. Again, I walked to the edge of the terrace facing the neighboring house and glanced around its yard. That rose flower was still there, in full bloom, and standing alone amidst the chaos. As I looked at that rose flower, I was interrupted again. This time, it was my aunt who asked me what I was doing. She was calm, but the strictness in her voice, as she told me to play on the other side, concerned me. She told me never to look at that house or go near it. Once again, I asked what was wrong with that house, but my aunt wouldn't tell me. She simply said I was too young, and that I might fall off the terrace, so I shouldn't go near the edge. After that, I was told 2 more times, once even by my mother, not to look towards that house. It was so frustrating. Everyone was telling me not to go near it, but no one was telling me why. The one thing I did know was that there was definitely something wrong with that house, even though nobody was willing to talk about it. Then one night when we were all asleep, I felt a sudden urge to go to the bathroom. It was located in the backyard and shared a common wall with that neighboring house, so I could clearly see the neighbor's backyard from the rear window of the bathroom. I woke my mother up and asked her to accompany me. We walked out to the backyard, where I went inside the toilet, and my mother stood in front, waiting for me to come out. After I had finished and opened the door to leave, I heard a faint cry coming from the backyard of the other house. It was clear, but very creepy. Startled, I looked at my mother to confirm whether or not she too had heard the cry. The terrified look on her face confirmed she had, and suddenly we both got very scared. I wanted to see who was weeping in their backyard at this time of the night. So I peeked through the bathroom window, and what I saw would haunt me forever. It was an old man sitting next to the rose flower. He was sobbing and whispering as if he was talking to someone, but I couldn't understand whatever language he was speaking in. He was definitely talking to someone, but there was no one else in the yard, except for him. My mother saw him sitting there too. As soon as we saw, we both ran as fast as we could into the house and shut the door. I asked my mom who the man was and who he was talking to, but she was visibly shaken. My mother yelled at me to stop talking about it and to go back to sleep. So I did. But I knew I had to figure out what was going on. The next day I asked my mom, so she and my cousins told me the story. The man we saw was the previous owner of that house. He and his wife lived there several years ago. One day, a woman selling bangles door to door stopped by their house. This was something a lot of people used to do at the time. The woman wore a lot of silver jewelry, which made the husband and wife greedy. In their greed, they trapped the woman in their home and killed her using electric shock. Afterwards, they buried her dead body in the backyard. A few days later, the police found out about the murder and dug up the body. The man was sent to jail for murder, and a few days later, his wife moved out of their house. No one knew why, but many said it was because their house was haunted. Several years later, the man got out of jail and moved back in with his wife. But since coming back, he'd changed. Every night, he'd return to his old backyard and sit for hours talking to the spirit of the woman he killed, in the exact same place he had buried her. After the woman's murder, her spirit tormented the entire neighborhood. Sometimes, when my grandmother would go to the bathroom at night, she could feel someone pulling her leg and trying to push her. Several others had seen the woman's ghost walking over their terraces during the night. Eventually, the neighborhood banded together and protected their houses with rituals and mantras. Even my uncle got iron nails consecrated with mantras and hammered them around his entire house, all to keep the dead woman away. Every neighborhood family protected their house, except for the one where she was murdered. This incident happened 10 years ago, and we'd since bought a new house. I don't know if the man I saw that night is even still alive, but the memory of that night still haunts me to this day.
Well, friends, how'd you like today's story? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for this channel to listen each and every weekday for more real horror stories. We got a ton of amazing real horror stories, and we're dying to share them with you. So until then, stay out of the dark and stay tuned for our next video.